Good morning and welcome to day 2 of the Future of Food Conference 2021, organised by EIT Food. We had yesterday a really engaging, involving session discussing all the aspects of how to make food more sustainable, how to make Europe more resilient, and also looking at UN goals around the world and how to deliver on those commitments. We met young food makers and we got some inspiring ideas from them. Today, we are continuing with a lot of great speakers. We're going to have various sessions, some in plenary, some in breakout rooms. So please do use the platform. Of course, for obvious reasons this year, once again, we are entirely virtual, but there's a lot you can do on that platform. Please do use the same link every time you access. It's a personalized link, and so you could use it for each session that you join. There are areas where you can do networking with your fellow participants to make it feel a bit more like real life. And in the reception area, you can view the entire event schedule. You can personalize it. You can choose which events you want to see when they're in parallel. And on the main stage here, we will have all our plenary areas. There are also opportunities to view some of the recordings from yesterday. If you missed them, they'll be on the platform until Friday. You can watch all the replays. So don't worry, there's no need to miss out on any sessions, even if you choose to go to a different one. I want to invite back Andyzinger from EIT Food. Andy, you were here all day yesterday following along with everything. What was your highlight?
Thank you, Jennifer, and again, welcome to everyone on this in this event. I think the day yesterday was very content-rich. We started from the high-level vision and objectives, and then we moved on to discuss the challenges and the strategy to tackle them. And then we concluded by showcasing some of our solutions with presentations of several of the EIT Food innovation projects. That's actually very similar to the journey of EIT Food itself, to what we're doing every day. We have to be able to see the big picture, but then we also need to define a strategy and to convert it into concrete projects, business ideas, and new technologies. Yesterday, in particular, two pieces caught my attention. First of all, it was the menu for change. I was super impressed by the strong focus and very clear sense of direction provided by those 6 calls to action presented by our future food makers of Generation Z. I was also impressed by the very concrete and operational recommendations they put forward. There seems to be a clear urge and desire to take action and to see others taking action to tackle food system challenges. I think that the problem with the generation that's currently in charge is that we are not bold enough to make some of the painful choices that I mentioned in my opening speech yesterday. Next to being very concrete, those future food makers are also clearly driven by values, and they're not shy about stating what those values are and to declare the priorities. This to me is very refreshing and motivating. The second remark I'll make is about some of the afternoon sessions. On the one hand, we talked about carbon farming and regenerative agriculture. On the other hand, we talked about sustainable food labeling and many other topics. But the agriculture and food labeling are kind of like different topics, but in reality, very connected, because farming practices can have a very large impact on the environmental footprint of food. It is our job as EIT Food to connect the dots and orchestrate innovation at the system level. And in both sessions, we've seen a lot of potential and momentum to adopt and to deploy new solutions. I believe that we're at the beginning of a revolution, and I'm proud of the fact that we at EIT Food are going to play a significant role in this with the EnviroScore that our partners created and the implementation of it through Foundation Earth. But this is also where new challenges emerge. Investing in and adopting new solutions is by nature risky, because the solution might be the wrong one, because adoption might cost money and time, and because we face opportunity costs by foregoing other options. And lastly, because it might create winners and losers. We're often faced with dilemmas in this situation.
Well, I must say, I was very struck by that discussion with the young food makers, because I had the opportunity, after hearing the 6 calls to action, to talk to representatives from industry and from the Commission. And it came through very clearly that they were listening, and they knew that there was a kind of an impetus from them, Generation Z, to do more. I described it as, you know, you're taking some steps, maybe B+, could do better. There's still some way to go before you're getting that A grade. Looking ahead towards today's sessions, our first discussion is going to be about consumer information. So I guess that's also linked back to some of these labeling questions that were raised yesterday. So I see a bit of synergy between the 2 days. And we're also then this afternoon going to talk about skills to drive the transformation of the food system. And we're going to talk about later on as well, ways that entrepreneurship can be brought into the entire food value chain. What are you keeping an eye on, or what's your message to attendees for today? We had a lot of questions from the audience yesterday, a lot of challenges, I think, as well, a bit of pushback. It wasn't all patting ourselves on the back too hard. So I hope we're going to have more of that today. What are you going to tell our audience to look out for and involve themselves in?
Thanks for the question. So first of all, I believe that there is a strong need for neutral and science-based information for the broad public. There are so many social media sites that misinform, that give pseudoscience and such, and the work that the team at EIT Food has done around creating Food Unfolded as the #1 science-based platform to inform the consumer is really, really important. And that is also where it links back to food labeling. Food labeling, good food labeling, clear food labeling can also create consumer trust. So both the information piece and the point of sale piece are important elements of raising the level of trust. And the second thing I'll say is that we have to foster a culture of being able to bet on the right horses in entrepreneurship. So, and by that I mean, first of all, we are very, very cautious in selecting the right startups and ideas for businesses to work with so that they can have an impact. So I mentioned yesterday in my opening speech the impact pathways that we're looking for, right? And we make sure that all of the startups that we bring in and all of the ideas that are creations are around exactly those impact pathways, so that we can create a healthier environment, we can create healthier citizens and such. And I think that's something that we're working very hard to do. We've created a program that is soup to nuts, from initial idea generation all the way to incubating, accelerating, and then to scale and work together with all the industry and university and research partners, which we call knowledge triangle integration. So I think all of that will be explained in much more detail today. And I think it'll be an exciting day today, because I think it gives everyone an opportunity to ask those tough questions. And I must say, I really welcome that engaged dialogue, and also folks to say, okay, well, let's just do a critical, second loop here and ask those questions, because it also helps us to think through better approaches. So I'm looking forward to this day, and I hope that everybody else is as well.
Well, thank you very much, Andy. I'm sure we are. As I said, yesterday was very engaged, and I want to remind the audience again today, use that chat function, use the question and answer function. Don't let us get away with letting anything slide. It's your job to hold all of us to account as well. Thank you, Andy. I'll let you sit back now and enjoy our first session. As we just mentioned, this is about Food Unfolded. And we're going to talk afterwards about consumer information, about science-based information, about trust, and about where we can work on countering misinformation or disinformation. So let's have a look now at the video to set the scene for us and tell us what it's all about.
Almost all fishing is unsustainable, and the only way to solve the problem is for Westerners to stop eating fish altogether. These were the conclusions drawn in the Netflix documentary Seaspiracy. Seaspiracy is without a doubt one of the most thought-provoking documentaries of the past few years. According to a UK survey, almost half of its viewers considered giving up fish after watching it. But the documentary was also accused of sensationalism. Criticism came, of course, from the fishing industry, hit hard by what was revealed in the film, but also from the scientific community and even from some of the experts interviewed in the documentary. People criticized the authors for citing obsolete sources, excluding important data, and reporting on narrow situations to draw general conclusions. Perhaps the most legitimate criticism was that the documentary discarded any solution other than going vegan, without considering the necessity of political action and our power as citizens. But I'm not here to go into the details of what the documentary got wrong. Despite its mistakes, Seaspiracy has done well in highlighting many of the problems of the fishing industry. And it put these problems on the radar of millions of people, prompting unprecedented action and reflection among the public. What I'm here to talk about is how the documentary impacted the work we do at Food Unfolded. Food Unfolded is a digital platform and printed magazine funded by the European Institute of Innovation and Technology for Food. We were born to reconnect people to the origins and future of our food, with the goal of being an accurate and non-partisan source of information on the food system in an ever more contradictory media landscape. We of course know that there's no such thing as being fully objective, but we do all we can to get as close to objectivity as possible. All of our content goes through several rounds of editing, and our articles always provide references to original sources, which are in turn checked by a professional fact checker. We literally tear each other's content apart to make sure we're not making assumptions or conclusions that are not evidence-based. Now, on the week that Seaspiracy aired on Netflix, we were coincidentally publishing some content on fisheries on our platforms. We touched on its impacts and possible solutions to make fishing more sustainable, with the understanding that seafood is currently a daily source of nutrition for over 3 billion people and a source of livelihood for around 1 in 10 people across the world. What we didn't know was how much backlash we would receive from our community simply for exploring possible solutions other than going vegan. The problem is that the documentary didn't just slam all fishing as unsustainable. It also had the effect of making its viewers think that anyone suggesting anything slightly different from the documentary had to be intellectually dishonest. People started asking legitimate questions. If we were funded by the EU, could we be trusted? Were we doing professional lobbying for fisheries? We engaged in long and insightful direct conversations with members of our audience, with some accusing us of doing a public disservice, while others thanking us for bringing nuance to the discussion. These polarized reactions made us consider our message and approach. We wanted people to be aware of the problems with fisheries, with the understanding that a reduction in fish consumption was necessary to save our ocean's wildlife, while simultaneously providing them with the tools to choose seafoods caught with more sustainable practices than others. We wanted our audience to learn that what is missing is the political will to make difficult decisions, and that we're not just consumers, but also citizens. And we must think about solutions as we can in both roles. But given our audience reactions, was it possible that our striving for accuracy and nuance was hindering our message from coming across? To answer this question in our usual evidence-based fashion, we did a study. We asked the Future of Food Institute to help us combine quantitative and qualitative research to compare the effectiveness of Food Unfolded content and Seaspiracy. 128 consumers from 13 countries participated in the study. Participants were exposed to both Food Unfolded materials and Seaspiracy in different order. Their attitudes towards fisheries and eating seafood were measured before exposure and after exposure to each of the materials. What emerged is that Seaspiracy and Food Unfolded were not seen as much in contrast as some of our audience had expressed. But while Seaspiracy was viewed by many participants as a wake-up call, Food Unfolded appeared to have a mitigating effect, and in a few occasions a sort of immunization effect, balancing out pessimistic attitudes. Did we want this outcome? We of course want to be objective, but we also want people to act. And here we learned that perhaps our content was making people feel less responsible, less inclined to act. Many participants appreciated Food Unfolded's objective, accurate, and optimistic approach. The fact that we provide pros and cons for different solutions, for example, rather than one truth, made participants feel that they were free to make up their own minds rather than being told what to believe. But some participants were left wondering whether they should feel pessimistic or optimistic. Our approach made our communication inconclusive for some. It made them ask, so what? That was not the case with Seaspiracy, which had a very clear narrative line, very clear enemies in its story arc, and a very clear outcome. So now we're left with walking the fine line between engagement and accuracy. And we're left with many questions. How can we be as effective as films like Seaspiracy in inspiring people to take action, while also providing more accurate and balanced content? Is it even possible to do so? What we think we know is that reflecting on the possible answers to these questions as a society will help us build a space for open dialogue without polarizing or radicalizing our audiences.
Well, that sort of set out very much for us what the issue is there. I hope that's given everyone a nice background to what we're about to discuss. This first session is entitled Consumer Information, the line between accuracy and engagement. So as you saw in 2019, following the launch of that Seaspiracy documentary by Netflix, the Food Unfolded team have run this project to help consumers better understand what is true and what is not, and what is science-based and evidence-based, but also to understand what consumers' reaction to that documentary was. We have some great speakers joining us now to talk about this and work around this very thorny subject. So I'm happy to welcome Dirk Bosma from the Future of Food Institute. Saskia Nuiten is the Communication Director at EIT Food. Domagoj Verbos is the Team Leader of Strategic Communications at EFSA. Thank you all very much for being here. Let me give you each a sort of an opening opportunity to get your reactions to that video straight out of the box, as it were. Dirk, please, your thoughts on what exactly was going on there.
Yeah. Well, we did this research for Food Unfolded, and what I found quite a surprising outcome of that research is that we expected a much more polarized debate among the participants of the research. So we would expect people to take sides and say that either Food Unfolded or Seaspiracy is right, and instead the debate was rather nuanced, and the participants really appreciated that they were given the opportunity to see the issue from different perspectives. That the consumers really understand that media is used to persuade them of someone's view, and that they would rather make up their own minds. If you want to communicate about these issues, it really adds to the credibility of the message if you give different perspectives, if you give an open point of view and an open tone of voice. And platforms like Food Unfolded, who are faced with communication with such a strong point of view as Seaspiracy, can make use of the attention that these media get, and instead of saying that this documentary is wrong, you should instead clarify, add nuance, and correct inaccuracy, and consumers will really appreciate that they are given different perspectives and given the opportunity to form their own opinions.
Thank you, Dirk. Domagoj, let me ask you your reactions. I mean, what lessons do we learn from this incident or this video and the reactions to it?
Thanks, Jennifer. Very happy to be here with you. Well, I'm a social scientist from the European Food Safety Authority, also team leader. So I'd say communication and risk communication is very close to my heart. But I mean, also at EFSA, we've done some research to understand a bit how we can produce content that meets the information needs of the audiences. Because on one hand, you have a scientific topic that you're working on, but then on the other hand, you have your partners, stakeholders, and consumers, and you want to make your communication relevant to them. And this, I think, is very similar to what we've seen in the video, because as you focus on a general public and, shall I say, citizens, for example, the insights we have seem to imply that communication of food safety, and I think in general food, it's a bit of an interplay of passion and duty, because in a way you can relate this to really Seaspiracy and Food Unfolded, because if you think of food safety, you know, food and nutrition, topics of interest, trends that we read and hear about every day, so really it's a passionate topic. On the other hand, you have food safety risks, which are maybe not your first choice when it comes to what is cool and interesting, but it's something that the consumers demand that is granted. So you have these two factors playing in, but every time you discuss healthy eating, simply eat your dinner with friends, you're actually thinking of both factors. So I think as scientists, to react to the video, I think we are committed to accuracy of information, but I also believe that communication science offers opportunities to package that information and that accuracy in an engaging way. So I don't know if you had the chance. We're very proud of our You Choose Safe Food campaign, which was a bit launched in this direction, assuring citizens that scientists are behind their everyday food choices using really everyday food examples. I personally don't believe in sacrificing accuracy, but I really trust in efforts that we can all be creative institutional communicators, and we can try to deliver that accurate science in an appealing way to our different audiences. I mean, it's a challenging journey, but with 20 years of the EU food safety system that we're celebrating next year, I think we can make that happen. We're on the right way, almost there. Thanks.
Thank you. We're going to come back to some of those questions around safety and so on, and trust and consumers. Saskia, what's your reaction, just your sort of first impression overall after watching that video?
Thank you, Jennifer, and good morning all. So as communicators of EIT Food, well, you're seeing me here today, but obviously I have a great team that is working on that. But we are working on enabling individuals to make informed choices, so healthier, sustainable choices, increase transparency and engagement in the food system for consumers, and to include consumer collaboration. As EIT Food, we bring this science-based accurate information on which the consumers can come to their own conclusions. But let's be honest, media such as Netflix have a reach that we can only dream of. And we just saw the video from Food Unfolded, our community platform, which, like Andy also said, it's a very important tool for us, and we've just launched it a few years ago, and it's a big growing tool, and it has its own role to play. Because if you see, for instance, more sensational media, like we just saw with Seaspiracy of Netflix, they can actually be a vehicle to raise awareness of a topic. And then more nuanced information can then be introduced into the discourse. And that is something that a Food Unfolded can do. Coming with only nuanced information, we could question if we could raise the same awareness as that on a certain topic as that Netspiracy did on this topic. Plus, it could also be a way of reaching hard to reach audiences as an initial engagement moment. And once reached, more nuanced content can be tagged along. And I think organizations like EIT Food, where I'm working for, but also other organizations like the EFSA, and we would do it through Food Unfolded, have a clear role to play in making that wider discussion possible. So engage with the topic. People are interested. They are maybe shocked. They are looking for more information. Let's offer them perspectives. Let's offer them a solution-oriented approach on the topic. Obviously science-based, correct, because that's what we do, and that's also where our expertise is. But and then allow readers and viewers to come to their own conclusion and act. Like Sylvia said, we really want people to act.
Well, I think all of you mentioned the word nuance, and that is inherently quite difficult to get across. Not all of the general public are scientists. And one thing that struck me with that is that not all the information that was contained in that Seaspiracy documentary was necessarily false or wrong. It was simply that the one true thing plus another true thing, and they've added 2 and 2 together and got 5. And this is part of what makes misinformation quite difficult to counter. And I want to ask you, what do you maybe believe is the difference between misinformation and disinformation? Was there, is there a setting out of the agenda behind the information that's presented, or is it simply that people have drawn the wrong conclusions? Dirk, let me put that to you.
Well, I don't think that there is a difference, but both misinformation and disinformation are very hard to identify by consumers if they have only one source of information. And if that information is brought in a very convincing way, people might not look for other sources of information that proves that the information that they originally got was wrong, or we also suffer from a psychological issue called confirmation bias, that as soon as we believe in something, we tend to give more value to information that confirms that what we already believe. So once this information or misinformation or disinformation is in the heads of consumers, it's going to be very difficult to convince them that the original information might not be as accurate. So you need to work harder, and you need to prove your point harder if you're not the first source of information that consumers get information from.
I think you've pointed to one very key issue there, is where information bias is, where people only hear one thing, where perhaps they're in an echo chamber. There is a two-pronged problem, however, of course, which is that also there's information overload, and consumers simply don't know what to listen to or who to listen to, and so they switch off. Domagoj, what really is the role in food authorities or agencies to help cope with this scenario?
Thanks, Jennifer. I think, first of all, I want to come back a bit to the misinformation and disinformation, just to say that, I mean, in theory, in literature, they are different concepts, you know, misinformation being something that they're both used as, you know, we use the term fake news, and it's a bit mild, but I mean, one is, you know, you want to spread information purposely in a wrong way. The other is, you know, presenting information in a wrong way, but not maybe purposely. But in the end of the day, in this complicated information ecosystem that you mentioned, I think the two bond together. So it doesn't really matter if the information was wrong on purpose or not, but the information is out there, and it's up, you know, and available to consumers. So I think sometimes we just need to accept that some of this information is out there, and we need to find ways to maybe counter disinformation, identify it, and then see what are the strategies. The role of authorities, I think the role of EFSA is to deliver, for us, is to deliver communication on the scientific assessments that we produce, but obviously in a way that is engaging and relevant to the public. We are aware that there is a lot of scientific information that we produce, for example, that is very relevant to the public, but that maybe in a way that, you know, if you would read a scientific opinion itself, would not be as engaging or as appealing to the audience as they would need. So we are really, so I think our role also with the new general food law is to really invest in risk communication that transforms that science into communication that is, as you said, more engaging, more appealing, but also that maybe really meets the information needs. And this is why we are investing a lot in social research, investing in understanding different audiences, also investing, you know, we have a lot of scientific opinions, and we're also prioritizing which of the opinions we will invest most in communication on, based on which are the topics that are really most interesting and that are the topics that really are most relevant for our stakeholders. So I think the role, I would say, of the authorities is to, in that complex world of information, really try to identify the topics where we have something to say based on our scientific assessment, and say it in a way that really helps put some, I would say, some order in this very, very complex set of information that is out there. Thanks.
Saskia, same sort of question to you about what is the role of organizations like EIT Food in countering misinformation or disinformation. As Domagoj says, it doesn't really matter whether it's intentional or not if the end result is that consumers are being fed the wrong thing. But I'm also interested to know whether it's difficult to identify when that's happening. Something like Seaspiracy, this big Netflix documentary, was obviously heavily advertised. We knew it was going on, but there's also chat groups where people are just sharing wrong information that you can't necessarily know about.
Yeah. No, that is true, and it's also what Domagoj said, that people are looking in different areas for their information. So yesterday you heard from the Future Food Makers, but as part of the work that we did there, we also did research under young people in Europe. We interviewed over 2,000 European Gen Z consumers, and there you indeed find that young people are attempting to fill the nutritional gap and misinformation themselves. And they do that mostly through social media contacts, such as TikTok or Instagram, and not so much going to, let's say, the EIT Food website. So it's very important indeed to keep a finger on the pulse and try to engage as much as possible with your audiences also outside of your normal channels to find out what the topics are, what the discussions are, and try to engage with them. Currently, what we do mostly, due to obviously the COVID situation, it's mostly online. But in the past, and hopefully soon again, if the situation allows, we also did actual live in-person meetings, dialogues, etc.
Well, let's talk a little bit about what the current challenges are. I'm interested to hear if from personal experience and work that any of you have, what do you think are the big issues with regard to consumers' priorities? Is it safety? Is it sustainability? Is it environmental concerns? Do you see any emerging trends in that area, Dirk?
Well, what we see in our research is that, that safety is not really an issue. People trust that what they buy in the shops is safe to eat. At least you won't get sick in the short term. But when it comes to sustainability, there is a growing desire to behave and to eat more sustainably. But there is quite some confusion about what actually is sustainable, and that even scientists don't agree what sustainable is. So you will find scientists who will say that organic food is the way forward, but there are also scientists who say no, we don't need an organic food. We need industrialized food in the with the highest production rates. So even scientists don't agree, and consumers, they want to behave more sustainably, but they don't know how to, and they need guidance. And for one thing, we found in research that people are very focused on packaging. They want to reduce packaging because they feel that that is a very tangible way of behaving more sustainably. But if you ask scientists, they will say, well, packaging is only a very small portion of the environmental footprint of a food product. So if consumers only focus on packaging, they will forego the opportunity to make decisions that are much more sustainable. So consumers overestimate the impact of packaging, but they underestimate the impact of switching to a more plant-based diet, and I think there is the most the biggest challenge to inform consumers about how they can make changes to their diet that is most effective in making their diet more sustainable.
I think so. I think you're identifying things there as well that are trends, if you like. Dominic, safety is not an issue. You're doing your job really well, apparently, since consumers aren't worried. So congratulations on that. But do you see any other areas that?
Well, that's an interesting point. I mean, I thank Dirk, and I will now take him as a sample of a citizen, and so it made my day. No, but I think, for example, the studies we do, also the Eurobarometer studies we did, and some of the other research we did show that yes, safety is not maybe as such a concern as some other topics, but it still is a concern. So I think food safety is something. It's a tricky business because it's not something you say it's done, and then it's something that when you're at peak of citizen trust, and we do have a food system in Europe that is really good, but we do need to maintain this. So we need to understand that food safety is not maybe a big concern, but then one incident or something can really shake this up. So we need to be very, very careful and maintain the high level of quality that we maintain. That said, when we tested, for example, food safety versus other factors, and some of them were maybe sustainability, price, taste, these other factors are also important for consumers. Some of the studies also show that sustainability is important, but other factors also play in sometimes before sustainability, like the price of the food, even the safety of the food, and the nutrition content, etc. So I think it's not an easy subject, but it is definitely a topic that consumers are more and more thinking about. And we also see that when we look at areas of EFSA's work, and we see that there is starting to be a growing interest in some topics. For example, animal welfare. Animal welfare is a topic that if you test it people's interest 10 years ago, it would maybe not have been on the top of their scale. But now when you look at all the efforts that have been done by the Commission to also promote this issue within the Farm to Fork strategy, and to really give a lot of mandates to EFSA to work on animal welfare and set standard, now we see that people are more and more interested in this topic, and more sensitive, if you want, to this topic. So I think that there are a lot of things to take care of, and it's also not just about eating and food, but it's also about, I would say, the One Health. So also thinking of the plants and the animals and the environment in conjunction with human health. And I think that's the way we're going towards, and that also brings different risks and different topics, but also different challenges and cool stuff for communication, I would say.
Well, with communication, there's always fashions and fads as well. I mean, if you asked 10 years ago why people were moving to a plant-based diet, it might have been out of concern for animal welfare. If you ask someone today, it might have more to do with environmental impacts on a planetary climate change issue. But Saskia, let me bring you in. You've got some comments on this area as well.
Yeah. So all the points just mentioned by my two colleagues here are definitely also what we see. I just wanted to add one more, and that is lack of transparency, and is what we see returning time and time in our consumer studies. So people feel that retailers, manufacturers, but also food authorities could and should be more open about what they do, how they do it. People even feel that farmers, which are actually the most trusted entity we've seen in our work in the EIT Food Trust work, but even they should be more open about, for instance, their production methods, and in particular the large industrial farms. So people are really calling for more openness, more transparency, so that they also know if they make decisions, what they are actually making a decision on. And well, it was also mentioned by Andy in the introduction. You have, of course, the upfront communication, but also the point of sale communication, for instance, clear labeling.
We have a couple of questions coming in from our audience. So I'll take one first, which is from Mohamed Ghoufran from Università degli Studi di Salerno, asking about if biased and less accurate information has conveyed something to the audience, is it comparatively difficult to tell the consumers at later stages why it was wrong? I suppose the point Mohamed's making is that you need to get out in front of the disinformation, which is a tricky challenge. Dirk, tell me, how do you do that? I mean, is it feasible?
Yes, it's feasible, but you need to work harder if you are let's say, the second source of information that is conflicting with a belief that is already imprinted in the minds of consumers. So you really need to work harder, and it's not impossible. Particularly, you see that with health. And if you look at what scientists recommended 10 years ago, it's different from what they recommend now as what is healthy, and it's different from 20 years ago, and it's different from 30 years ago. So it is possible to change beliefs, but it's definitely more difficult, and you need to come up with a very well proven points to debunk previous beliefs, particularly if it's really very ingrained beliefs that you want to get people to convince otherwise. But it's not impossible.
Well, there is also a question and a difficulty of how to communicate risk to consumers. Domagoj, perhaps you could tackle that area, because I mean, there are no absolutes in food supply. We have questions yesterday that being raised about the value of labeling on best before or best buy dates or consume by dates. I mean, so there are elements of risk that you need to communicate to consumers in order for them to be safe with their food. How do you do that without causing alarm?
Well, I think first of all, in the area of biological hazards, and let's say that I would link the best buy and best before that, but also I think these are the topics where we do see some risk for consumers, and we try to do more proactive communication. And I think our work on the Best Buy and Use Before is an example. I think we made some material that, you know, it was also guidance for producers, but then also for consumers, also working with our member states to disseminate this. And it was, so I think, I would say that scientific opinions usually would not create alarmism, I would say. I think there's always a way to try to be the accurate reporting and trying to tell people how they can mitigate the risks. I think provide some sort of comfort, I would say, in terms of communication to the consumers. I agree with you. It's not a very easy topic, but I think we've Saskia mentioned before that there's a lot of things happening on social media, and people are not necessarily always using the websites of the authorities. And I agree with you, but we've tried now in our communication campaign, You Choose Safe Food, we've tried Instagram. We've tried a lot of Instagram carousels on topics like, you know, additives, best before dates, you know, how safe are eggs for moms to be, you know, things like that. And I have to say that even if the content was the scientific content from our scientific opinions, packaged in a way that was, I would say, a bit more engaging for the a bit more, let's say, appealing to the Instagram users that we were targeting, I have to say the engagement rate was quite high. And I think we will probably be working more on having some Instagram content in the future years of our campaigns, because it does work. And I think if we as authorities, as Saskia said, I fully agree, need to step out of, you know, the traditional communication channels and need to really be social media always, in my opinion.
Well, that's a challenge, and one that feeds into a question from our audience as well. Damien Jourdain from Open Innovation at Danone is asking, beyond right or wrong information, how can we cope with polarization and the phenomenon of echo chambers in social media? Damien, that is an enormous question to put to our panelists. I'm not sure that the four of us here in the 15 minutes remaining are going to be able to solve that. But Saskia, perhaps
let me have a first crack at it. No, Damien, it's an excellent question, and it's definitely something which is not easy to solve. And but I do believe that continuous dialogue is important. So we need to keep into discussion with people that maybe are completely of the opposite opinion, but we need to at least stay in dialogue. And maybe we cannot, how to say, convince each other. At least we what is important is that you at least do not shut out certain groups. And sometimes it can also be, for instance, that you have put out some information which maybe you didn't take, which we had in the past in a piece on coffee that we did, where we looked a bit too much on the scientific side, and we forgot that coffee is actually, well, all food is quite an emotional connection, but coffee definitely is an emotional connection. I see Jennifer going for it at the moment. And there we actually had the barista community, which really came into discussion with us online via social media, because they felt that we misrepresented something. And actually in that dialogue, we came to something where we thought, okay, yes, we indeed looked a bit too much on scientific, and we forgot about the emotional aspect here. Where we made, together with the barista community, some changes, and actually had a very pleasant and good relationship afterwards, going forward. So, okay, maybe this is a small example, but I do believe that at least trying as much as possible to stay into dialogue is a small step forward, and it will unfortunately not solve immediately polarization and echo chambers, but it's an important step, I think.
Absolutely. And you've actually touched on an answer to another question from Carlos Abundancia, who's asking about using emotions in communication. Is it possible to still be science-based but also engage in emotion? Domagoy, come back and tell us your thoughts on this overall polarization question.
I mean, it's a very difficult question, as you said, and there's not much we can solve here. But what I wanted to offer is some interesting thoughts from some interesting evidence from the report we did on risk communication earlier this year. And there we actually had one of our experts working with us testing some of the techniques and how they worked when applied to polarized views, right? So, for example, I mean, we know from the literature, first of all, that debunking is not really effective always. Actually, it can create the opposite effect, right? You start debunking and talking against a certain topic, and then the fire sparks. And so this is not, but we did test, for example, also stuff like, human interest stories, infographics, and we see that actually the textual information with photos and videos actually works best in polarized discussions. So accurate reporting that has some video or textual information works better than, for example, human interest stories. Because we thought, human interest story, this is a story about a lady that, and no, this doesn't work. This actually, especially it had strong negative comments and also high levels of criticism. Also, like the policy prescription or constructive news, things like, things that say, oh, this is an evidence, and that includes proposal for a policy solution. That also doesn't necessarily, it get a lot of pushback from audiences. So impartial, accurate reporting with some context, multimedia format, text with photos and videos, that's what we saw, at least from the literature, that works best as techniques on the impact of user response, let's say, in a polarized debate.
Dirk, your thoughts on this as well?
Yeah, obviously, as a researcher, my answer to this question is try to understand how people form different beliefs. So if you have a polarized discussion and the other side of the polarization is the belief that you don't want people to have, I think it's very important to understand how people form their opinions and what sources they use and what the impact of those sources is. And once you understand how people form opinions, then you can also be more effective in trying to change their opinions using the media that they use and using the tone of voice that is effective for those particular target groups.
We have another question from Christine Crosby, a sustainability director at the Hero Food Group, who would welcome thoughts on how to use sustainability reporting for awareness raising or transparency with both retailers and consumers. Dirk, let me put that one to you first and see if our other colleagues want to answer.
Yes, definitely. And in this slide, I would like to mention an initiative called EcoScore, which is currently being applied in some supermarkets in Belgium, and I think Lidl in Germany is also experimenting with it. And it is a system that consumers can use to understand the total environmental impact of the products that they use. And it's comparable to a label that we have here in the Netherlands for electrical appliances. It's called the energy label, and it's a very simple label from A to E with the most energy efficient products having an A label. And what that does, it makes energy use clear to consumers, and so they are able to choose the most energy efficient products. But there's another effect as well, and that is that the producers of electrical appliance, they don't want to have the B label if all of their competitors have the A label. Now this EcoScore really fulfills a need from consumers to have an overall idea of what the impact of their food is. So it's very clear. It's A to E, and it just offers consumers some guidance in making decisions. And there's a whole scientific algorithm behind it that takes into account loads of different factors. The complexity of sustainability has been decided by scientists and has been laid down in this algorithm. algorithm so that the consumers simply have a choice between A, B, C, D, and E. So that's one way to deal with it. Make it simple, make it clear, and obviously the labeling itself has to be transparent as well, and it has to be clear how a certain product gets a certain rating. But I think this is really effective, and there are other initiatives like what Oatly does is they print a number of CO2 emissions that are associated with the product. But if just one brand does that, there's nothing to compare, and a number in CO2 doesn't really mean anything to a consumer, where a green label or a red label is clear.
I think you've struck on something there. And I know, of course, someone will then attack it for being too simplistic. If that's the danger. If it's simple and straightforward, you will never keep everybody happy. But I want to, for the remaining sort of minutes that we have, ask a question about sort of communicating a campaign or a motivating sort of call to do something different or motivate consumers to change their behaviors rather than simply countering disinformation or misinformation after the fact. Is there a role for agencies to say, drive consumers in a particular direction, to deliberately say, we want you to choose something that's more sustainable, we want you to choose something that is healthier? Domigo, for you.
For me, I just want, and I want consumers to trust the food safety system and be aware of the science that is behind their everyday food choices. To be aware that they can make food choices also with critical thinking and also with all the information that we provide. And going back to sustainability, I think sustainability is really a big concept. There are so many aspects of sustainability. So just thinking about EFSA, there are so many angles that you could communicate about this, starting from animal welfare that I talked before, even the best before dates that actually, the best before dates could actually lead to reduction of food waste, the proper use of best before dates. Then you have, the bee health aspect, you have the edible insects. There are so many things. And I think for all of these things, what we really want from consumers is just to be able to, to feel that they can trust the food safety system and that what is on their table has passed the scientific risk assessment and is there to protect them. So I think I wouldn't talk about steering particular consumer behavior in a specific direction, because that is not a job of a risk assessor. But I think the job of a risk assessor and the communicator of risk assessment is really for people to be sure that they are protected by the system. Thanks.
Thanks. Saskia, same question to you about driving consumer behavior, be it towards healthier choices or more sustainable choices. Is there a role for, where do you see, if you like, the campaigning communication role within the food system for that?
Yeah, I actually think it's also broader than campaigning. So if you indulge me a little bit to bring it a bit broader, I think we need to move away from looking at people, consumers, as the receiving end of the supply chain. For decades, consumer opinions have been mostly asked to see if they like a certain flavor, a certain structure, so the mouthfeel. So it was more about bringing a product that would increase sales or testing something which would improve your marketing. And I really believe that rather we should involve them as equals across the whole food system, and for example also in innovation processes. So not just at the campaigning side, but already earlier in the process. So think of things like co-ideation, co-design, co-creation in innovation. And when we did the Citizen Participation Forum this earlier, it also shows that people are actually rather open to new innovations in the food sector, and especially ones which can make our food healthier and more sustainable. But their definition of what an innovation is not always something technical. So That's quite interesting. And so at EIT Food, we really work on and we really believe in, we need to give people also the opportunity to be involved, but to really be involved and not also learn obviously more about our food and our origins, because that can deeply impact food choices, but it should not be just that. It should actually be across all the work that we do in the food system.
Well, thank you. We've just got a few minutes left, so I'm going to ask each of you for a sort of 1 minute takeaway, recommendation, wrap up thought. You can open up something new, or you can reflect or repeat something you've already said. Dirk, you can have the floor first.
Yes. Well, obviously, as a researcher, my main takeout is, if you want to communicate effectively, if you want to innovate effectively, you need to understand consumers. You need to understand how they make decisions and how they form opinions. And if you understand how that happens, you can be much more effective in changing their opinions, and you can be much more effective in coming up with innovation that really strike a chord with the consumers, because they solve a problem that they actually have.
Well, I think that's true not just in the food world, but more broadly in general as well.
True.
Damagoy, your key takeaway, your final closing thought?
I think I would reiterate what Dirk said. For us, I think for me especially, there's two things that we need for communication in the decade we're facing. We need audience first, so we need to really understand consumers, not just consumers, but everyone in the food chain, and we need to understand how to communicate with everyone. And this doesn't just include their preferences and perceptions. This also includes formats that are more let's say appealing to them, but also multilingualism, for really having a communication in the EU that meets the needs of all the countries. The second part is coordination, and there I think is the coordinated communication between everyone who is in the food chain, also with industry, with other people, with the civil society. So to have a coordinated message and to try to work in the EU to have a standard, I would say, coordinated set of main messages for the audiences, and not giving contradictory information that then just sort of, I would say, further tangles the already complex system. So understanding audiences and delivering clear information in a coordinated way, those are my two takeaways.
Yes, I'm surprised we didn't mention not putting out conflicting information. That's rather shooting yourself in the foot at an EU level. Saskia, you have the last word.
Thanks for that. So I will not repeat what Dirk and Damagoy just said. Sorry. But I fully underwrite that. I just want to bring one more thing to the table. And for me, that's continuous dialogue. I think that is really, really important. And also in helping people to make their own decision based on the information that you bring. And maybe if I can say again what I just said before, is that involve the consumer as a real actor, which they are, which we are all consumers also in the food system, and not see them as just the receiving end of the food system.
Well, thank you very much indeed. I normally push back about citizens being called consumers in panel debates, but in this case, we literally are consumers. So I think key takeaways, we can rely on getting the general public involved, the consumers, the citizens, to talk about this. And thank you to our audience as well. So as a small sample of people getting involved and talking about this issue, we're really pleased for your questions. I'm sorry we didn't get a chance to answer all of them, but it was quite a rapid fire round to deal with such a big issue. Thank you, Dirk, Damagoy, and Saskia, for a really enjoyable conversation to kickstart our day 2 of this conference. I'm sure you're going to stay with us for the next session, but I also encourage our audience, do stay here, do use the tabs to keep networking, and do keep sharing your thoughts using the hashtag FutureFood21. But stay with us, we're coming back in just a moment with another session.